Erin Williams, a strong, hard-working black woman, was just trying to survive another exhausting week when her life was shattered in the most brutal way. On what should have been a quiet Saturday night grocery run, she found herself ambushed in a supermarket parking lot by a racist, off-duty white cop with a god complex and a fist full of hate. Without warning, he punched her in the face, because in his twisted mind, her skin color was a threat. But Erin didn't crumble. She rose, she fought back, and that single act of defiance ignited a wildfire of outrage that torched the lies of the justice system, exposed the rot in law enforcement, and turned Erin into the face of a movement no one could ignore. What began as a cowardly slap from a racist cop became a national reckoning, one that tore through state lines, shattered silence, and forced the world to look in the mirror. This isn't just a story. It's a warning, a revolution, a slap heard around the world. Before we dive in, tell us, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Let's show Erin the world is watching. It was late Saturday afternoon, and the parking lot of Metrotown Supermarket was overflowing. Shoppers were weaving between vehicles, carts squeaked across the asphalt, and horns blared as drivers scrambled for spots. Erin Williams, a 29-year-old black nurse, fresh off a 12-hour hospital shift, had finally managed to pull into a narrow space near the front. Exhausted but relieved, she cut the engine and exhaled, unaware that someone had been watching. Just 2 slots down, a white Ford Explorer idled. The man inside had been circling like a shark. His name was Brad Turner, a veteran cop with 20 years under his belt, currently off duty. Clad in jeans and a faded sheriff's department hoodie, Brad looked like any middle-aged suburbanite. But beneath that exterior brewed a different temperament, one that had clashed with internal affairs more than once. As Erin stepped out of her car and slung her purse over her shoulder, the sound of screeching tires snapped the moment. Brad's SUV lunged forward and skidded to a halt inches from her bumper. Startled, Erin took a quick step back. Brad threw his door open and stomped out, his face already red. "You just stole my spot," he barked. Erin frowned, confused. "I'm sorry. I didn't see anyone waiting." "Of course you didn't," he snapped. "People like you never see anything but yourselves." It wasn't the first time Erin had heard a phrase like that, but something in Brad's tone felt sharper, meaner. She looked at him carefully. He was glaring, eyes narrow and jaw clenched. "Look, sir, I didn't see any turn signal or your car when I arrived. If you were waiting, I apologize," she said, keeping her voice calm. Brad stepped closer. Too close. "Save the apology. You think you can just walk around like you own the place?" Erin moved slightly to the side, trying to create distance, but Brad mirrored the motion. It was subtle at first. Then came the line that made her spine stiffen. "You people always think rules don't apply to you." Erin blinked. A small group of people nearby turned to look. One teenager pulled out his phone and began recording. Brad saw it but didn't flinch. He had spent his life under scrutiny. He thought he was untouchable. Erin's voice was steady but edged now. "I don't know what you think this is, but this is just a parking spot. I have no idea why you're making it more than that." Brad smirked. "Because I know your type. Arrogant. Entitled. You need to be reminded where you stand." Before Erin could take another step or say another word, Brad raised his hand and slapped her. The sound cracked through the lot like a gunshot. Erin stumbled, her head whipping to the side. A collective gasp rippled from bystanders. The teen recording had zoomed in now. Someone shouted. A shopping cart rattled against a car door as a woman backed away in shock. Brad didn't retreat. He stood there, breathing hard, chest puffed like he expected applause. Erin slowly turned back, the side of her face red and pulsing. For a second, there was only silence. Then, with perfect clarity, she raised her hand and struck back. Not with force, but with finality. Her open palm connected with his cheek, sending a shock of silence through the witnesses. "Don't ever touch me again," she said through clenched teeth. Brad froze, not because of the pain, but because of the audacity. Someone had dared to strike him. Him. The teenager live streaming muttered, "Yo, she just hit back." Brad took a shaky step back. "You're going to regret that." Aaron stood firm. "Maybe, but I won't regret defending myself." He opened his mouth, probably to unleash more venom, but then noticed the people. Phones out, cameras pointed. No one moved to help him. No one spoke on his behalf. A woman behind him whispered, "Did he really hit her first?" "Got it all on video," the teenager said. The clip was 39 seconds long. It would hit Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok within 10 minutes. The caption varied, but the story remained the same. A white man, later identified as a police officer, slapping a black woman over a parking spot. Within an hour, the video was reposted by several major activists. By sunset, national media had picked it up. "Slap, back for justice," trended on Twitter. Comment threads filled with rage, disbelief, and calls for accountability. But, back in that parking lot, Erin Williams was still just standing, her cheeks still burning, her pulse still erratic. Shoppers moved carefully around her, unsure whether to comfort her or stay out of it. She took a deep breath and turned toward the supermarket. She had come for groceries. She wasn't about to leave empty-handed. As she walked inside, she passed Brad Turner. He hadn't moved. His face was pale now, but his eyes stayed locked on her back. Hatred didn't vanish when caught on camera. He turned slowly, walked to his SUV, and slammed the door so hard the mirror shook. Inside the store, Erin gripped the handle of a shopping basket. Her hand trembled slightly. She forced herself to breathe, to focus, to remember she hadn't done anything wrong. She picked up bread, then milk, then vegetables, one by one. Small victories. Outside, people were already talking. A man in a baseball cap said, "I hope they arrest that guy. He's a cop," someone else muttered. "That makes it worse." Back in her car 10 minutes later, Erin sat behind the wheel, letting the AC hum. She watched her phone buzz with notifications, texts from friends, a call from her younger sister, and one message from an unknown number that read, "You don't know me, but what you did took guts." She looked at her reflection in the rearview mirror. The redness had faded slightly, but her eyes looked different. She had stood up, on instinct, on principle. She didn't know what would come next, but she was about to find out. The sun was beginning to dip, casting long streaks of gold across the rows of parked cars outside Metro Town Supermarket. Erin Williams turned off her blinker and slowed her car, scanning the crowded lot with a methodical gaze. Her eyelids felt heavy from the long shift she'd just completed, but her focus remained steady. After looping the lot twice, she finally spotted a vehicle reversing out of a tight space just 2 rows from the entrance. She waited patiently until the vehicle cleared, then smoothly pulled in, aligning her tires perfectly within the white lines. She adjusted the gear to park, turned off the engine, and let her shoulders drop with relief. A grocery run was not how she wanted to spend the tail end of her Saturday, but she needed milk, bread, and a few things for her younger sister's visit tomorrow. Erin was meticulous by nature, someone who followed rules, respected order, and preferred not to draw attention in public. As she unbuckled her seatbelt and reached for her purse in the passenger seat, a sudden screech of tires made her head snap to the side. A white Ford Explorer swerved into the lane and stopped abruptly, its bumper just inches from her front fender. The driver's door flew open before she had even stepped out of her vehicle. Erin instinctively froze, unsure of what was happening. Then she saw him, a white man, maybe in his late 40s or early 50s, stormed toward her car with sharp, agitated movements. His eyes locked onto hers with unmistakable hostility. He wore jeans and a gray hoodie, and his face was already flushed with anger. She had no idea who he was or what he wanted. The man stopped a foot from her door and leaned toward the window, voice raised. "You took my damn spot!" Erin blinked, startled. She cracked her window slightly, keeping a measured tone. "Excuse me," she said. "There wasn't anyone waiting. The space was empty." "Don't lie to me," the man snapped. "I was about to turn in and you cut me off." Typical. Erin's brow furrowed. There had been no turn signal, no vehicle in sight when she pulled in. Still, she tried to stay calm. "I didn't see anyone waiting. If I had known you were about to park here, I would have let you take it." "Right," he scoffed, "because your type always says that after the fact." Erin exhaled slowly, now sensing the layers beneath his aggression. She opened her door slowly, not wanting to escalate anything but refusing to be cornered. She stepped out and gently closed the door behind her, maintaining eye contact. "Look, I'm not trying to argue. It's just a parking spot." "No, it's not just a spot. It's about respect, something you people don't seem to understand." Her stomach tightened. She heard it clearly now, the venom beneath the words. She remained steady, unwilling to engage at his level. "Sir, I really don't want a confrontation. If it means that much to you, I can leave and find another space." His lips curled. "Now you want to play the peacemaker? You're just trying to act innocent." Erin took a subtle step back. Other shoppers were moving through the lot, some slowing as they passed, glancing but not stopping. The man noticed the small crowd forming and seemed to feed off it. His voice grew louder. "I saw you sneak in, thinking you could get away with it, just like the rest." "The rest of who?" she asked, her voice lower but firm. "You people, always cutting corners, always playing the victim." Erin didn't respond immediately. Her instincts told her not to let him draw her into his narrative. She glanced to the side, seeing that her car was still clear to exit if she needed to leave quickly. She was weighing her options when he stepped in closer, his breath now inches from her. "You need to learn you can't just do whatever you want," he said. "Someone needs to teach you that." Erin's hands tightened around her purse straps. "If you're trying to threaten me, I suggest you back away," she said evenly. "And if you feel you've been wronged, you're welcome to report me." "Report you?" He laughed bitterly. "I don't need to report you. People like you always think the world owes you something." She raised her voice, just slightly, enough for the bystanders to hear. "I've said I'm sorry. I've offered to move, but you keep escalating this. What exactly do you want from me?" He took another step, towering over her now. "I want you to stop pretending you're better than everyone else." His tone was low, controlled, but brimming with contempt. Erin stood her ground, unmoving. Her eyes scanned the faces around them. Some were clearly filming now. She noticed a teenager a few feet away, phone raised, camera light on. She didn't move, she didn't shout, but inside, something was shifting. The hostility wasn't about a parking space. It never was. It was about power, control, and how people like him responded when someone like her didn't shrink. Erin finally spoke again, her voice firm but calm. "This isn't going to go the way you think. I'm not afraid of you." The man stared at her for a long beat. Then, for the first time, he smiled, smug, menacing, like he had already decided how this would end. Erin didn't know him, but something told her this wasn't the first time he had tried to intimidate someone. It might not even be the worst thing he had done, but she still didn't know what he was capable of. Not yet. Erin hadn't realized yet that the man in front of her was a cop, and she had no idea the level of systemic bias about to unfold. The tension in the air was palpable. The noise of the supermarket parking lot, the clang of carts, the murmur of conversations, the low rumble of distant engines had faded into a strange quiet around Erin and the man still standing inches from her car. Erin remained calm on the outside, but inside, something twisted. She had not come here for a confrontation, but now she was at the center of one. The man's presence had become a wall, blocking her car door, her path forward, and soon, even her ability to ignore what he truly thought. Brad's face was flushed, jaw rigid, as if restraining himself from something more volatile. His fingers twitched at his sides. He looked Aaron up and down with the contempt of someone who had already made a judgment long before this moment began. "You people think you're above everyone," he muttered, voice low but acidic. Erin's expression didn't change, but her spine stiffened at the phrase. She met his eyes without flinching. "I don't know what kind of assumptions you're making about me, but this is a public lot. I parked in an open space. That's all." Brad's lips curled into a sneer. "You really believe that, don't you? That you can just take up space wherever you go, never apologize, never follow the rules, just act like you own everything." Erin's heartbeat slowed. She had heard that tone before, on the news, in whispered stories from friends, and sometimes in the subtle undertones of workplace conversations. But rarely had it come at her so plainly. She chose her words carefully. "I did apologize. I offered to move. But you made it clear this isn't about the parking." Brad took a small step closer. "You're damn right it isn't. It's about the fact that people like you have no respect." Erin's brow furrowed slightly. "People like me?" she echoed. "That's right," he spat, his voice louder now, eyes glinting with anger. "Your kind, always loud, always playing the victim, always crying racism when someone tells you the truth." Erin inhaled slowly, steadying herself against the rising fire within. She was aware of the crowd around them now, more people than before. Some had paused their own errands to witness the unfolding exchange. Most were silent. None had intervened. Brad noticed it too, and instead of backing down, he used the audience. He pointed a finger at Erin's chest and said, louder this time, "You people never learn. Always making everything about color. Always thinking the world owes you something." Erin didn't move. Her face was unreadable, her posture unwavering. "That's not what this is about," she replied. "You're angry because you didn't get your way, and now you're using race to justify it." Brad chuckled, a low, mocking sound. Typical response. Always deflecting, always twisting it. "This is why people don't respect you. You demand respect, but you don't earn it." A man standing 10 feet away had begun filming on his phone. His hand was steady. He didn't speak. He didn't step in. He just documented. Erin noticed the phone, saw the red recording indicator, but she didn't turn to address the bystanders. She kept her eyes on Brad. He leaned in again, his voice colder now. "You walk around here like you're some kind of queen. You dress up like you're better than us, but you're not. You're just another entitled brat hiding behind your skin color." The words hit like a slap, but Erin didn't flinch. She stood still, absorbing the blow without moving. She wasn't new to this kind of hatred, but this was the first time it was so openly directed at her, so unfiltered, and in public daylight. "Is that what you really think?" she asked him quietly. Brad didn't hesitate. "Number. That's what I know. You people are always the same." Erin's hands curled into fists at her sides, not out of a desire to strike, but to keep herself grounded. She knew this wasn't just an angry man ranting. This was someone who had been conditioned to believe what he said, someone who had never been held accountable for saying it. Another person across the lot had now joined in filming. A woman in a red blouse stood behind a minivan, her phone up, expression grim. Still, no one moved closer. No one called out. No one stepped between them. Erin could feel their presence, the weight of their attention, but their silence was louder than Brad's voice. "You don't know anything about me," Erin said, "but you've already decided who I am. That's what this is really about." Brad scoffed. "I've seen enough to know your type." She took a step to the side, trying to walk past him, but he shifted again to block her. "You want to play innocent? Fine, but you're not going to win this one." Aaron's eyes narrowed slightly. Win what? This isn't a game. This is harassment. Brad laughed again, more openly this time as if he couldn't believe she dared use that word. You call this harassment? Lady, you haven't seen harassment yet. The bystanders watched. Phones were still rolling. Still, not one voice had spoken up. Erin's breath was steady, her tone controlled. Are you threatening me now? Brad leaned in, his breath hot. I'm telling you, maybe someone needs to put you in your place. Erin looked around again, scanning the faces watching. They weren't helping. They weren't stopping it. They were just collecting footage. And that's when she understood something. This wasn't just between her and Brad. It was between her and every system that made him think he could say what he wanted, to whoever he wanted, and get away with it. Her voice remained calm, but her eyes burned with clarity. You're not going to scare me, she said. Brad's smirk faltered for just a moment, just long enough for her to know she'd pierced through. She didn't yet know that the man speaking to her held a badge in his wallet and a weapon in his glove box. But, more importantly, she didn't yet understand that the silence around them wasn't just fear. It was the sound of a society that had seen this before, and let it happen. A witness had begun live streaming, but no one had stepped in to stop Brad. The moment felt suspended in time. The air around them had thinned, like the calm before a summer storm. Erin didn't move. She stood her ground beside the car door, body tense, eyes locked on Brad. He was close, too close. His breath was shallow, his chest rising and falling in the short bursts. Around them, the parking lot existed in a strange standoff between the mundane and the surreal. People still loaded groceries, carts rolled, doors slammed. But the immediate circle around Erin and Brad had gone still, frozen in anticipation of something no one could quite predict. Then, without warning, Brad's arm lashed out. The slap landed hard across Erin's cheek, a brutal crack that echoed through the concrete. Her head whipped sideways from the impact, a sharp jolt of pain flaring along her jaw. Her body staggered a half-step back, but didn't fall. A collective gasp came from nearby. Someone dropped their phone. A woman shrieked, but no one moved forward. Brad's face remained twisted with that same blend of arrogance and rage, as if he had just done something he thought should have been done a long time ago. He straightened his shoulders, glanced briefly at the phones pointed his way, then back at Erin with a sneer that practically dared her to respond. Now, maybe you'll think twice next time, he muttered under his breath, not even trying to hide it. Erin's eyes blinked rapidly, the sting from the slap still pulsing hot against her skin. Her heart pounded in her ears, but she didn't cry. She didn't crumble. In that moment, something primal awakened inside her. Not rage, not revenge, but clarity. A clean, cutting truth surged forward, louder than the pain. She raised her hand. It moved with instinctive precision, not fast, not violent, but deliberate. Her palm struck his face with a firm smack that landed squarely across his cheek. It wasn't forceful enough to knock him back, but the meaning behind it hit harder than anything physical. The air vibrated again, the crowd tightening. Brad's eyes widened in disbelief. You don't have the right, she said in a low, steady voice, not to hit me, not to talk to me like that, not even if you carry a badge. Brad's expression twisted, first in shock, then in fury. His hand hovered at his waist for a moment, as if reaching for something out of habit, then curled into a fist. But he didn't strike again. He didn't move. For the first time, he seemed unsure. People around them erupted into quiet murmurs. The teenager with the phone stepped in closer now, his screen aimed squarely at Brad's face. Got all that? He said to no one in particular. It's live. Brad turned his head slowly toward the crowd, as if just realizing how many lenses were watching. Erin didn't flinch. Her chest rose and fell evenly. She was done being cornered. She stepped backward, putting a hand on the driver's side door to open it. But Brad, despite everything, still wasn't finished. "You're going to regret that," he spat. "You think slapping a cop is brave? You think that makes you some kind of hero?" Erin didn't answer. Her gaze remained fixed, not defiant, just unshaken. "I don't care what you think I am," she said, "but I know what you are." Brad's nostrils flared. "You'll find out soon enough who I really am." Then he turned. He stormed back to his SUV without another word. He slammed the driver's door shut so hard the vehicle rocked, but he didn't leave. He sat there, gripping the steering wheel, staring out the windshield like a man calculating his next move. Inside the car, his face was pale beneath the red splotches. The engine remained off. Outside, Erin exhaled and finally slipped into her own car. She closed the door and sat still for a moment. Her face still stung. Her hands shook, but she had not been broken. Her phone buzzed beside her. Notifications began to pour in. Mentions, tags, messages. The video had already spread. The caption varied, but the footage was unmistakable. A man slapping a woman in broad daylight. A woman hidden back and holding her ground. One clip had already crossed 10,000 views in under 15 minutes. Someone had posted it with the words, "She fought back." Finally, someone fought back. But as Erin reached for the keys, something sharp dug into her awareness. He hadn't left. Brad was still in his vehicle, watching. He wasn't done. Not yet. Because if Brad Turner couldn't punish her in public, he would find another way to retaliate. And as the internet flared with outrage and support, Brad's rage simmered in silence, already plotting what came next. The sun had nearly set when Erin exited the supermarket. The fluorescent lights above the store flickered to life, casting long shadows across the lot as dusk settled in. Her grocery bag hung from one hand. Bread, milk, eggs, basic things she hadn't even remembered picking up in the haze of adrenaline. Her mind was still rattled, trying to process the confrontation, the slap back, and the quiet judgment of strangers watching it all unfold. She wasn't thinking of revenge, only resolution, only escape. She just wanted to get home, shut the door, and pretend for a few hours that the world wasn't the place it had proven itself to be today. She stepped onto the asphalt, turning left toward her car, when something stopped her cold. Her feet froze mid-stride, the breath in her chest caught like a hook had snagged it. There, along the driver's side of her car, from the front fender to the rear panel, was a jagged, raw scratch. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a bump or the kind of scrape you pick up from careless parallel parking. No, this was deliberate. Deep gouges in the paint, sliced down to bare metal, long, uneven, and angry. Her heart sank. The bag in her hand dipped toward the ground, but she caught it just before it spilled. For a second, she thought maybe she was wrong. Maybe she had parked too close to a cart return. Maybe a child scraped it with a toy. But that thought evaporated quickly because she saw it, lying on the asphalt just behind the back tire, a coin. Not just any coin, but one of those thick silver challenge coins cops like to carry, sometimes engraved with department seals or mottos. This one bore a sheriff's star. She didn't pick it up. She didn't have to. Her gut told her everything she needed to know. Brad. He had never left the lot. He'd been waiting, watching, boiling. Maybe he saw her walk into the store and thought about what the cameras had caught, thought about how the public would react. He couldn't touch her again, not with everyone filming now. But her car, her property, that was a message he could still deliver, and he had. She stared at the scratches, pulse rising. She imagined him crouched beside her vehicle, keys or something worse in hand, dragging it along her door like he was carving his anger into her life. The very thought of it brought back the sting of the slap, not just on her face, but on her dignity, her safety, her sense of place in the world. And still, people walked past without saying a word. One man glanced over and looked away. A woman wrangled 2 children into an SUV nearby. The parking lot was full, but Erin felt completely alone. Again, she reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. Her thumb hesitated for a second before she tapped the dial pad. She didn't want to call. She didn't trust what might happen next. But the damage on her car was too clear to ignore. Her silence would be complicity. She pressed the digits, 911. The operator's voice came on quickly. Erin kept her voice composed as she described the vandalism, the earlier incident in the lot, and her growing concern that the man who assaulted her was responsible. "Did you see him do it?" the dispatcher asked. "No," Erin said carefully, "but I saw him confront me. He hit me. He's still parked nearby, and now my car is damaged. There's a coin on the ground behind my tire. He's law enforcement. I recognize the badge design." Her voice tightened. "I don't think he's done with me." The dispatcher's tone shifted. "We're sending a patrol unit now. Please stay at the scene and don't confront the individual again." Erin ended the call and slipped her phone back into her pocket, her eyes scanning the lot. Brad's SUV was no longer where it had been. She turned slowly, checking every row. Then she saw it, parked several spaces over, half shielded behind a black van. She couldn't see if he was inside, but something told her he was. Waiting. Watching. The moment stretched long. She didn't move closer. She stayed by her scratched car, standing straight, her face hardening with each passing second. This wasn't just about a parking spot or a slap. This was retaliation. Measured. Calculated. A reminder that even when the world watched, people like Brad still believed they could act with impunity. It was a feeling she'd grown up learning to fear, that even when the truth was on your side, the system might not be, especially when the person you're accusing wears a badge. But not this time. As red and blue lights flickered in the distance, growing brighter as the patrol car approached the lot, Erin gripped the strap of her grocery bag tighter. This time, she wouldn't walk away. This time, she would speak. She would not be intimidated into silence. Not by Brad Turner, not by any badge, and not by any system that allowed this kind of hatred to exist in plain sight. She didn't know what would happen next. She didn't know if justice would come quickly or at all. But she had just made her choice. Erin had dialed 911, and with it, she stepped into a battle far larger than herself, one that would test not just her resolve, but her faith in everything the badge was supposed to represent. The flashing red and blue lights illuminated the rows of parked cars as the patrol vehicle rolled to a smooth stop near Erin's scratched sedan. The brightness cut through the early evening gloom, scattering curious glances from nearby shoppers. Erin stood upright beside her car, arms folded tightly across her chest, her jaw set. The grocery bag sat on the asphalt at her feet, its paper handles twisted, forgotten. Her nerves were taut but steady. There was no turning back now. The driver's side door opened first and a young officer stepped out. He was in his early 30s, maybe younger. Short black hair, clean uniform, steady eyes. His name tag read Reyes. He shut the car door gently, not with the dramatic thud Erin expected from someone rushing into a situation. He scanned the area with quiet focus, then approached Erin with a calm, measured gait. "Good evening, ma'am. I'm Officer Miguel Reyes. Are you the one who made the call?" His voice was respectful but professional, neither cold nor overly friendly. "I am," Erin said, her voice even. "I'm the victim." Reyes nodded once, pulling a small notepad from his pocket as he glanced down at the side of her vehicle. His eyes narrowed slightly at the long gashes in the paint. "This is the damage you reported?" "Yes, I found it when I came out of the store. And that coin," she pointed toward the sheriff's challenge coin still lying in the dirt by the rear wheel, "wasn't there when I parked." Reyes crouched and used a pen to shift the coin slightly, without touching it directly. He studied it for a beat, then looked back up. "Did you see anyone near your vehicle while you were inside?" "No," Aaron replied, "but I know who did it." Reyes stood again, his eyebrows raised slightly. "You saw them?" Aaron shook her head. "I didn't catch him in the act, but I had an altercation with a man earlier, right here in this lot. He confronted me over a parking spot. It escalated. He slapped me. I slapped him back. A few people recorded it. He's a white man, late 40s, gray hoodie, drives a white Ford Explorer." Reyes's brow furrowed. "Did he threaten you after the confrontation?" "He said I'd regret it. He didn't say how. But then I come out and find this." Reyes nodded slowly, absorbing the details. "Did you get his license plate?" "No, but I saw his vehicle parked again, 2 rows over. He moved after the argument." Reyes turned toward the direction she indicated, then looked back at her. "You mentioned a badge. You think he's law enforcement?" "I don't think. I know," Aaron said, her tone sharpening. "He implied it. And that coin, it's not something a civilian just drops. He acted like someone who was used to being in control, like he expected to be obeyed." Reyes didn't respond immediately. He turned back to the coin, then to the scratches on the car again. He jotted a few notes, then looked at Aaron. "Would you be willing to give a full statement now?" "I'm ready," Aaron said without hesitation. They moved to the side of his patrol car. He opened the passenger door, letting her sit inside while he stood just outside with his pad. She recounted everything: the parking lot dispute, Brad's escalating anger, the slap, her response, the aftermath, and then the vandalism. Her voice was steady, if clipped, and she didn't embellish. She spoke like someone who knew the truth could stand on its own. Reyes listened carefully, asking only to clarify details. At one point, he paused, tapping the pen against his notebook. "Did anyone intervene during the initial confrontation?" "No one stepped in," Aaron said, "but several people filmed it. One person even said it was live streaming." Reyes's face tightened slightly. "Have you seen the video?" "Not yet," she replied, "but I've received messages about it." He nodded again, jotting that down. Then his radio crackled, and a voice came through. "Reyes, possible ID match on the white Ford Explorer, registered to a Bradley Turner, retired law enforcement, former deputy. We're confirming his current status now." Reyes blinked once, then turned away from Aaron and stepped aside, muting the channel briefly. His eyes scanned the rows of cars again. He walked slowly toward the area Aaron had indicated earlier, peering across windshields, faces, and shadows. A white SUV sat half-shielded near the back row, windows slightly tinted. Reyes adjusted his radio back on and spoke low into the mic, requesting a second unit. He returned to Aaron with a quiet but firm expression. "Ma'am, I believe your suspect is still on site. I've called for another unit. I'm going to approach the vehicle and request identification." Aaron nodded but didn't speak. Her fingers clenched in her lap. Reyes turned and walked back toward the SUV. As he neared, the driver's window lowered slightly. Brad's face was visible behind the glass, calm, blank, almost bored. Reyes approached carefully. "Sir, I need to speak with you." Brad's eyes didn't blink. "About what?" "There's been a report of vandalism on a vehicle in this lot," Reyes said, "and I'd like to ask you a few questions." Brad smirked. "You accusing me of something, officer?" "Just asking," Reyes replied. Brad leaned his head against the window frame. "You're new, aren't you?" Reyes didn't answer. Brad chuckled quietly. "Be careful who you talk to like that, kid. You don't know how things work yet." But Reyes didn't move. He stared straight at Brad. For the first time, Brad's smile faltered just slightly. Back at the patrol car, Aaron watched them. She couldn't hear what was being said, but she could see their posture, their tone, and what she saw gave her the faintest glimmer of something unfamiliar in this situation, a crack in the wall. She didn't know it yet, But the thin blue line that had protected men like Brad Turner for decades was beginning to shift. The young officer taking her seriously wasn't just protocol, it was the beginning of something bigger. The police weren't just listening now. Some were starting to question each other. The first fracture had formed. The system was beginning to strain. The flashing lights cast eerie reflections across the windshields as Brad stepped out of his white SUV, calm and composed like someone strolling into a routine conversation. Officer Reyes stood firm, notebook in hand, pen ready, eyes watching every movement. Brad shut his door with calculated ease and walked forward, the slight smirk on his face betraying no concern. It was the same expression he wore during the confrontation, part confidence, part condescension. But this time, it was paired with something more dangerous, calculation. "Let me make this easy for you," Brad said, stopping a few feet in front of Reyes. "I know how this goes. She's already told you a story, and now you're here to hear mine, right?" Reyes kept a neutral expression. "I'm here to collect all accounts of what happened tonight. Please start from the beginning." Brad crossed his arms, glancing at the onlookers still lingering in the background. The crowd had thinned, but a few people watched from a distance. "She was aggressive," he began. "Entitled. Walked right into a parking space I was waiting for. Didn't even hesitate. I rolled down my window to let her know I had been signaling. She ignored me, gave me attitude. You know the type." Reyes said nothing, his pen gliding silently across the page. Brad continued, adjusting his posture like he was telling a tale he'd rehearsed. "I got out of the car, tried to talk to her calmly, and she snapped, started yelling, called me names. I told her to back off, and then she hit me, open palm, right across the face." He gestured toward his cheek with exaggerated emphasis. "Unprovoked, just like that." Reyes paused. "Did you strike her first?" Brad blinked, expression unchanged. "Of course not. I backed away. I told her I wasn't going to argue. I went back to my car. That was it." "And the scratches on her vehicle?" Reyes asked. Brad raised his eyebrows in mock surprise. "What scratches?" "She found her car vandalized after the incident. There's evidence someone used a sharp object to damage the driver's side door." Brad's voice dipped lower, more defensive. "I don't know anything about that. I wasn't near her car once I got back in mine. Maybe someone else did it. You know how people are, especially when there's drama." Reyes narrowed his gaze slightly. "There's a coin, one used by law enforcement, found near her back tire. You carry one?" Brad laughed, almost too casually. "Everyone carries those. Hell, half the guys at the department hand them out like souvenirs. Doesn't mean I dropped it." "And you're currently with which agency?" Reyes asked. "I'm retired," Brad answered quickly. 2 decades with county patrol. I still keep in touch with folks. Volunteer sometimes." "So you're aware that knowingly making a false report is a criminal offense," Reyes said flatly. Brad's smirk returned. "I know the law better than most, and I'm telling you the truth." Before Reyes could respond, his partner, Officer Green, returned from checking nearby surveillance cameras. She nodded subtly at Reyes and whispered something too low for Brad to hear. Reyes nodded in return, then turned back to the former deputy. "All right," Reyes said. "We'll document your statement. Please remain on site. A supervisor may want to speak with you." "No problem," Brad replied. "I'm happy to cooperate." He turned and walked back toward his vehicle, still wearing the smug look of someone who believed the system would protect him, because it always had. Meanwhile, Aaron remained seated in the patrol car's passenger seat, watching the exchange through the windshield. She could read it even without the audio. Brad was lying. She recognized the smooth way he moved his hands when talking, the way he tilted his head at just the right angle, played the role of the aggrieved. It was the language of experience, of someone who had practiced manipulation for years. She felt her stomach knot. Reyes walked back toward her. "Miss Williams," he said carefully, Thank you for your patience. Based on what we've heard from both sides and given the nature of the incident, we'd like to bring you to the station to give an official statement." "Am I being arrested?" Erin asked, her voice steady but wary. "No," Reyes said, "but this is moving into formal documentation. You're not under arrest, and you can leave at any time. But I'd strongly encourage you to come in, especially if you're pursuing a report on the property damage and assault." Erin nodded. "I'll come." She gathered her things, her bag of groceries, now crumpled, and her phone, buzzing with more notifications from the viral clip that was spreading across social media. As she stood, she caught sight of Brad still watching from behind the tinted glass of his SUV. Their eyes locked for a second, and in his gaze was a promise. Not fear, not apology, but warning. He thought this was over, that the story he told would be enough to bury the truth. But Erin wasn't going to let him write the ending. She climbed into the back seat of the second patrol car that had arrived to transport her. As the door closed, the weight of everything settled deeper in her chest. The ride to the station would be short, but she already knew the hours ahead would be long. She was entering a different kind of courtroom now, not one with robes and gavels, but one where power moved quietly, and justice was often a matter of perception more than fact. Inside the police station, prejudice and truth were about to go head to head. The fluorescent lights inside the Ashton Police Department flickered slightly as Erin sat in a small windowless room with beige walls and a metal table that felt colder than the night outside. A dull hum buzzed overhead from a ceiling vent, filling the silence between each passing moment with a low mechanical whine. The door behind her clicked shut, and she was alone. On the table sat a clipboard with a blank incident form, a black ink pen clipped to its edge, and a bottle of water someone had set down earlier without saying a word. She took a breath, then another, and then she began to write. The form asked for simple details: name, address, date of birth. But beneath that, the empty lines waiting for her account stretched longer than they appeared. Erin gripped the pen tightly and started at the beginning. Not the start of her day, but the moment the silence had broken in the parking lot when a stranger's voice demanded obedience, when her peace shattered in an instant. She wrote about the argument, the sharp words, the tone, the slap, her slap back, the scratch on the car, the coin. Every word, every sentence was deliberate, clear. She didn't embellish. She didn't dramatize. She didn't have to. She wrote the truth. Halfway through the second page, her hand trembled slightly, not from fear or fatigue, but from the sheer weight of having to justify her existence in words, of needing to explain why standing her ground wasn't aggression, of having to articulate that self-defense, when you look like her, is often mistaken for defiance. She paused, stared at the ceiling for a second, then lowered her gaze and kept going. "I responded with a slap, not out of anger but to stop the assault," she wrote. "I did not escalate the situation. I was cornered. I acted in the moment, instinctively, to protect myself. I never intended violence, only to defend my dignity." The words stared back at her. Simple, factual, human. After finishing, she placed the pen down and leaned back, exhaling slowly. The door opened quietly. Officer Reyes stepped in, a small folder tucked under one arm. His demeanor was slightly different now. Not tense, not relaxed, but somewhere in between, like a man beginning to see past the surface of a situation and deeper into its implications. "You done?" he asked. Erin nodded. He walked over and took the statement, flipping through it briefly before glancing up. "I appreciate how detailed this is." Erin folded her arms. "I didn't want anything misinterpreted." He nodded again, then sat down across from her. "There's something you should know. While you were writing that, we got confirmation from the supermarket. They've got external security cameras facing the lot. A camera was pointed directly at the area where the incident occurred." Erin's heart skipped It captured the confrontation. Reyes continued. From what our desk sergeant says, it shows the moment the man, Brad Turner, approached your vehicle, the exchange of words, the first slap, and your response. Aaron held his gaze. So, there's proof. Reyes nodded. Yes, and it matches what you wrote down. A strange sensation rippled through her. Relief, but muted. Because while video could prove what she said, it still didn't guarantee fairness. History had taught her that cameras didn't always ensure justice, not when the person on the other end wore a badge or had years in the system. What happens now? She asked. We'll request a formal forensic review of the footage, along with chain of custody documentation. It's part of building the case, and since you're alleging vandalism on top of the assault, we'll need a full property damage report. I'll file it under your name tonight. Erin didn't thank him, not because she wasn't grateful, but because she knew that thanking someone for doing the right thing sometimes felt like another form of imbalance. Instead, she nodded. And him? Reyes hesitated. He's not under arrest, not yet, but with the video and your statement, we're moving toward probable cause. We've logged the coin as potential evidence. If it matches anything from his service or network, that strengthens your claim. There was a beat of silence. Then Reyes leaned forward slightly. Ms. Williams, I need to ask, are you planning to file charges? Aaron didn't blink. Yes, I want him held accountable. I'm not walking away from this. Reyes studied her for a moment, then sat back. Understood. We'll process this officially and keep you informed. You may be asked to return for follow-up questions or to identify witnesses. If anything changes, you'll hear from us. She stood. So did he. Reyes walked her to the door and paused as he opened it. Just one thing, he added. I've been on the force 7 years. I've seen a lot of complaints that get complicated real fast. This, one, it feels different. Aaron turned to him. Because it's on camera? He shook his head. Because the way he looked at you, it wasn't about a parking space, it was about power. She stepped into the hallway, the air colder there. The station buzzed faintly with chatter and ringing phones, but everything around her blurred into silence. She had given her statement. She had told the truth. And now, there was proof. But truth in a system like this didn't always mean justice. It only meant that the fight had officially begun. As she exited through the front lobby, passing the reception desk and back out into the chilled night, Aaron knew there was no turning back. Somewhere in the evidence room, her words now sat beside a video file. Both would have to speak louder than decades of precedent. Both would have to cut through the weight of perception and bias. But this time, the camera had not looked away, and that changed everything. Inside the evidence review room at the Ashton Police Department, a large monitor flickered to life. The room was dim, lit only by the pale blue glow of the screen and the quiet buzz of the overhead ventilation. Aaron sat at one end of the table, flanked by 2 officers from the Internal Affairs Unit. Across from her sat Officer Miguel Reyes and Sergeant Lena Hartley, who had joined the case after the initial report. On the screen paused a grainy frame. The supermarket parking lot, time-stamped and angled slightly downward from the corner of the building. In the frame, 2 figures stood by a silver sedan, her and Brad Turner. The image may have been distant, but the tension it captured was unmistakable. "All right," Sergeant Hartley said, remote in hand. "This is the moment in question." She pressed play. The footage rolled. There was no audio, but Aaron didn't need sound to remember every word. Brad was already in her face, gesturing, stepping in too close, dominating the space like it was his. Aaron's body was stiff, restrained. He leaned in, and then, without hesitation, his hand came up and struck her. The room fell completely still. The video caught her head jerk sideways from the impact. The officers leaned in, squinting. They watched as Aaron took a breath, straightened her shoulders, and returned the slap. Not out of rage, but controlled, defiant, measured. Then came the crowd. A few phones raised. One angle clearly showed someone recording the incident on a live stream app. Then Aaron walked away, and Brad stood there, seething, his fists clenched. "Freeze that," Hartley said. The screen paused on Brad's face. The contempt was visible even in low resolution. Reyes let out a low breath. "It matches her statement almost exactly." Hartley nodded. "More than that, it confirms it. She wasn't the aggressor." He initiated physical contact. She responded. A junior technician stepped in from the side door and handed Hartley a tablet. "Sergeant, the video's already circulating on social platforms. It's trending under the tag number Justice for Aaron." Hartley's eyebrows rose. "That was fast." The technician nodded. "Someone on site must have streamed it live. Multiple clips are now floating on TikTok, Twitter, and Facebook. One was shared by a verified civil rights attorney, another by a local news anchor." Aaron felt her stomach twist. She hadn't wanted to become a hashtag. She hadn't asked to be part of another viral tragedy. But this was real, and at least now, her truth wasn't being buried. Reyes scrolled through his phone, checking one of the videos. "Some of these already have hundreds of thousands of views, and the comments, they're all in her favor." "Good," Hartley said, tapping the tablet. "Then we need to move fast, before Turner gets the chance to spin this. I'm issuing an immediate administrative suspension. Badge and gun surrendered pending investigation." Aaron looked up. "That's it? He hits me, lies to you, scratches my car, and he just gets a suspension?" "It's procedural," Hartley said carefully. "But trust me, this isn't being swept under the rug. The video changes everything. His false statement alone could carry weight, let alone the assault and vandalism." Aaron leaned back, crossing her arms. "He doesn't think he'll face consequences. That's the problem. He never has." Hartley didn't argue. A few hours later, while Aaron was still being debriefed and filing the property damage report, news outlets picked up the story. A local journalist with connections in City Hall tweeted a clip of the slap with the caption, "Off-duty officer assaults black woman in broad daylight. She fights back." Video tells the truth. The clip spread like wildfire. That night, national media began covering it. Some outlets focused on the facts, what happened, what the footage showed. Others took the angle of racial profiling, abuse of power, and the system's long-standing protection of men like Turner. Civil rights organizations began posting statements of support for Aaron, calling for a thorough investigation and permanent removal of Brad Turner from any position of authority. Hashtags poured in. #, Justice for Aaron. Protect black women. Accountability now. Badge is not immunity. Outside the Ashton Police Department the next morning, a small crowd of protesters began to form. Some carried signs with Aaron's name. Others held up screenshots of the slap, printed large on poster board with the words, "This ends now." The energy was growing, but it wasn't chaotic. It was focused, angry, but organized. Inside, the department scrambled to respond. Turner was brought in that afternoon, not in cuffs but called into the chief's office. He walked in with his shoulders squared, still radiating the entitlement that Aaron had seen in the parking lot. But this time, the reception was colder. He was asked to turn over his badge and sidearm immediately. He hesitated for a moment before complying, tossing both items onto the desk with a heavy clunk. "You're suspended. Effective immediately," Chief Marlowe told him, his voice clipped, pending the outcome of internal review and potential criminal charges. Brad scoffed. "This is political. I'm the scapegoat because she knew how to play the victim card. Look at her. Turns on the waterworks and the cameras come running. The video shows you initiated contact," the chief replied sharply. "Don't insult our intelligence." Brad leaned forward, his voice lowering. "You really want to throw me to the wolves over some edited clip and a media circus?" "Your actions brought this on yourself," Marlowe said. And if you think this department is going to cover for you after that footage, you're mistaken." Brad stared him down, then stood. "This isn't over." Marlo didn't respond. Back at her apartment, Erin sat alone on the couch, the TV muted. Her phone buzzed every few seconds. Messages from strangers, support from old friends, reporters asking for statements. She wasn't ready to speak, not yet, but the tide was rising. The public had seen the truth. They had seen what happened without filters or excuses, and they were watching what came next. Outside her window, another protester held up a hand-painted sign that simply read, "We see you, Erin." And somewhere across town, Brad Turner sat alone, still believing he could spin his way out. But the truth was no longer just her word. It had been caught on camera, and the system, though slow, had finally started to move. The law office of Ava Hayes was modest, nestled on the second floor of a brick building in downtown Ashton. No flashy signs, no glass walls or designer desks, just sharp minds and relentless energy. Inside, the walls were lined with framed articles, trial victories, and photographs of Ava standing beside clients whose names had once been hashtags too. The reception area was quiet when Erin stepped in, her shoulders squared, her jaw tense, a folder tucked beneath her arm containing everything she had: the police report, a printed screenshot of the video, and a copy of her written statement. A paralegal greeted her and led her to the back, where the door to Ava's office was slightly ajar. Erin stepped through and met the woman she had heard about all week, the attorney known for taking on cases no one else would touch, for speaking hard truths in courtrooms that didn't want to hear them. Ava Hayes looked up from a stack of briefs and gave a nod. She was in her early 40s, with tightly coiled hair pulled back and piercing eyes that immediately measured intention. No smile, just clarity. "Erin Williams," she said, standing to shake her hand. "Sit." Erin sat. "I've reviewed the footage," Ava said without delay, sitting back down. "I've read your statement. I followed the department's response. I've also spoken to Officer Reyes and 2 independent witnesses who confirmed everything you said. This is not just a case. This is a battleground. Are you ready for what that means?" "I didn't ask to be part of any war," Erin said, "but I'm not walking away from it." Ava nodded once, slowly. "Good." She turned the monitor on her desk toward Erin. On it played the viral clip again. Brad's raised hand, Erin's response, the crowd forming. The volume was muted, but the weight of it filled the room anyway. Ava clicked pause at the exact moment Erin's hand met Brad's face. "Self-defense," Ava said. "Clean, controlled, and necessary. But do you know what the department's internal memo is trying to spin? That your response escalated the situation and made it harder for officers to respond. You know what that is, right?" "Deflection," Erin said. "Correct, but that's where they've already lost. The narrative is out of their control. What we're going to do next is take this from public outrage to legal accountability." Ava slid a thick file across the table. "This is a draft of our civil complaint. We're naming Brad Turner as a primary defendant in a personal capacity for assault and battery, false report, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. We're also naming the Ashton Police Department under vicarious liability for enabling and failing to prevent retaliatory conduct by one of their own, even off duty." Erin flipped through the pages slowly. "You think we can win?" "We're not filing this to lose," Ava said. "This is not just about punishment. It's about precedent. Too many cases die quietly because victims don't fight back after the cameras shut off. But the law is clear. Your rights were violated. You were harmed. And you have proof." Ava leaned back, clasping her hands. "But I'm going to be honest with you. They'll come after you. They'll dig into your past. They'll try to smear your name, paint you as hostile, difficult, dramatic. The media will spin. Some will say you provoked it. Others will say this is overblown. You have to be ready for that." "I'm already living it," Aaron replied. "They've sent reporters to my job. My neighbors are whispering. Someone slid a note under my door that just said, 'Watch your back.' I'm not new to this." "Then we fight forward," Ava said simply. They spent the next 2 hours drafting affidavits, compiling digital evidence, and finalizing the motion. Ava's paralegal joined briefly to coordinate timelines. By the end of the meeting, Aaron had signed the retainer agreement, and the complaint was ready to be filed with the county court the next morning. Before Aaron stood to leave, Ava slid one last paper across the table. "This is a media strategy plan. We'll make a formal press statement when the lawsuit is filed, but I'll handle all public responses. If anyone contacts you directly, reporters, trolls, even supporters, direct them to me. Your job is to stay grounded, stay safe, and stay sharp." Aaron nodded, gripping the paper tightly. "What about him?" she asked. "Turner. What does he do now?" "He's already on administrative suspension," Ava said. "But after this complaint is served, he'll be formally summoned. If he ignores it, we request a default judgment. If he responds, we depose him. Either way, his name goes on record. There's no hiding from that." Just as Aaron reached for her coat, Ava added, "There's one more thing. We've been contacted by a coalition of civil rights groups. They're planning to back your case, provide resources, possibly amicus briefs if this escalates." Aaron blinked. "Why me?" Ava tilted her head. "Because you didn't flinch. You pushed back, and it was caught on camera. That's a symbol people rally behind, but it only matters if you see this through." "I will," Aaron said quietly, "all the way." As she walked out of the building, the city felt colder, not because of the weather, but because everything was real now. Papers were signed. Allegations were formal. Power had been challenged, and the system had been notified. She took a deep breath at the top of the stairs and looked out at the gathering dusk. Somewhere across town, Brad Turner would be receiving notice of the lawsuit within 24 hours. His name would appear on a legal summons. His world, the one he'd long navigated with impunity, was shifting beneath him. The day of reckoning wasn't theoretical anymore. The court date was coming. The air outside the Ashton County Courthouse was thick with anticipation. Long before the courthouse doors opened, a crowd had formed on the steps, spilling into the sidewalk and out toward the street. News vans lined the curb. Reporters angled cameras for live updates. Protesters waved handmade signs in the morning breeze. Some bore Aaron's face, others displayed slogans that had become the voice of the movement. Justice for Aaron, stand up, speak out, no badge above the law. Aaron arrived in a dark coat, her hair pulled back, her face composed but pale beneath the pressure. Flanked by her attorney, Ava Hayes, and 2 aides from the Community Support Coalition, she walked slowly up the steps. People reached out to touch her hand. Some whispered words of encouragement as she passed. She nodded at them, grateful, but didn't break stride. Her eyes were focused straight ahead. Dozens of live streams were already rolling. One TikTok video alone had 80,000 viewers by 9:15 a.m., tracking Aaron's entrance with commentary that ranged from hopeful to outraged. A young woman near the courthouse doors held her phone in one hand and tears in her eyes. "This is bigger than one case," she whispered to the stream. "This is all of us." Inside, the courthouse buzzed with barely restrained tension. Security was tighter than usual. Uniformed deputies escorted both parties through separate entrances. The courtroom had limited seating, and only a fraction of the crowd could witness the proceeding in person. But the judge had authorized live remote access for the press, an uncommon move that underscored the gravity of what had begun. Aaron was seated at the plaintiff's table, expression unreadable. Her fingers were interlaced tightly in her lap. Ava leaned over and spoke in a calm, low voice. "Today is just procedural. No need to speak unless the judge addresses you directly. Let me handle the rest." Erin gave a slight nod, her gaze darting across the courtroom. Brad Turner sat across the aisle at the defense table, flanked by his new legal counsel, a man named Ellis Granger. Granger was a seasoned attorney known for defending law enforcement officers in high-profile misconduct cases. His demeanor was relaxed, even affable, as he spoke with Brad, who remained stone-faced. Brad's appearance was carefully curated: blue suit, light tie, clean-shaven. He looked less like a man on trial and more like someone auditioning for public sympathy. But Erin saw through the performance. She had seen the real man, the one behind the uniform, behind the privilege. At exactly 10 a.m., the court clerk called the room to order. The judge, Honorable Ruth Calloway, entered and took her seat at the bench. Her reputation preceded her: stern, fair, and notoriously intolerant of courtroom theatrics. "Good morning," she said, glancing over her reading glasses. "Today's matter concerns the civil case of Erin Williams versus Brad Turner and the Ashton Police Department. We are here to establish pretrial motions, confirm receipt of the complaint, and schedule further proceedings." Ava stood first. "Your Honor, we are prepared to proceed. The plaintiff's complaint has been submitted, and all necessary materials have been served to the defendants as of last week. We request that the court set a discovery schedule and establish a firm trial date due to the public interest and urgency of the matter." Granger rose smoothly after her. "Your Honor, while the defense does not dispute receipt of the complaint, we do contest the framing of this incident. Mr. Turner acted in self-defense, under threat, and we request the opportunity to submit a motion to dismiss on those grounds. Additionally, we intend to challenge the admissibility of several pieces of evidence, including digital recordings taken without our client's consent." The judge's eyes narrowed slightly. "You'll have your opportunity to file those motions in writing. Today, we stay focused." As the hearing continued, the court established key dates, discovery deadlines, deposition windows, and a tentative trial start in 8 weeks. The judge also approved the inclusion of video evidence from the supermarket security footage, pending authentication. While the legal wheels turned inside, the courthouse steps had become the backdrop to a growing movement. Local activists took turns addressing the crowd. Community leaders called for broader reforms, demanding accountability not only for Turner, but for the institution that had protected him for years. On social media, clips from inside the courtroom circulated widely. Artists created illustrations of Erin standing on the courthouse steps, fists clenched, eyes forward. Celebrities reposted hashtags of support. A popular podcaster aired a live episode from just outside the building. But amid the support, there were shadows. That same morning, anonymous social media accounts began circulating clips edited out of context, frames showing only Erin's slap, not Brad's instigation. Conspiracy-laden commentaries flooded certain corners of the internet, painting her as the aggressor, labeling her lawsuit as a money grab, and her reaction as anti-police hysteria. Granger's office leaked a statement to select media outlets suggesting that Brad was suffering from emotional distress due to the viral attention and was being unfairly vilified before trial. The statement claimed that the lawsuit was trial by social media, designed to erode trust in law enforcement rather than seek justice. It was clear now, Erin wasn't just facing Brad, she was facing a machine. Still, as she stepped back outside with Ava after the hearing, the roar of the crowd greeted her like a wall of sound. Erin paused at the top of the courthouse steps. Reporters thrust microphones forward. Photographers called her name, but her eyes were fixed ahead, not on the cameras, but on the people holding signs with her name, on the young girls watching from the curb, on the seniors who nodded in quiet solidarity. Ava stepped to the microphones first. Today was the beginning, not just of a legal process, but of a reckoning. The evidence speaks for itself, and we believe the court will see the truth. But let me be clear. Aaron Williams has already shown more courage than most people will ever have to. And we will see this through. Aaron said nothing. She didn't have to. As they walked down the steps, side by side, Aaron knew the trial had officially begun. Not in the eyes of the law. That was still weeks away. But in the eyes of the public, of the community, of those who still believed that power should come with accountability. Across town, Brad Turner sat in a quiet office, watching the live stream from his phone. His lawyer beside him, calm but calculating. He had seen the crowd, and he knew this wasn't just about one slap anymore. This was about power, and it was slipping away. The courtroom air was dry and stiff, with a kind of silence that didn't settle but instead pulsed, taut, and waiting. On the second day of the hearing, the defense was set to present their first full argument. The benches were again filled. Activists, students, off-duty nurses, and curious citizens all packed in beside court officials and media observers. At the plaintiff's table, Erin sat quietly, her eyes fixed ahead. She'd chosen not to look at Brad unless absolutely necessary. Across from her, Brad Turner sat beside his defense attorney, Ellis Granger, calm and unnervingly confident. Judge Calloway entered precisely at 9. She glanced down at the docket, then looked up. Counselor Granger, the court recognizes your motion to speak. Granger stood smoothly, buttoning his jacket. He was practiced, polished, and precise, with a slow, deliberate way of speaking that gave the illusion of control. He walked forward with calculated humility, stopping just in front of the jury box. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "I ask you to put aside what you may have read online. I ask you to set aside trending hashtags, viral video snippets, and the fury of the public square. Today, I ask you to meet a man, a father, a veteran, a public servant, a human being." Brad shifted in his chair slightly, as if reminded of who he was supposed to be. Granger continued, painting a picture. Brad Turner is not a monster. He is not a symbol. He is not the embodiment of a corrupt institution or a failing system. He is a man who made a mistake under stress, during a moment of confusion, frustration, and perceived threat. He let that hang in the air before stepping toward the jury again. Let me tell you about that day. Mr. Turner had just come off an emotionally exhausting week. His father, recently diagnosed with early-onset dementia, had wandered from home the night before. His wife, recovering from surgery, was home alone. Brad had gone to the supermarket not for himself, but to pick up groceries for his family. His mind was already fractured with anxiety when he saw what he believed to be an aggressive driver speeding into a parking space he'd been waiting for. Did he react emotionally? Absolutely. Did he let frustration overcome better judgment? Yes. But was this assault? Was this racially motivated battery? The evidence will show otherwise. Granger turned to face the judge momentarily, then back to the jury. You'll hear testimony that Brad tried to engage in conversation, that his words, while firm, were not intended to provoke, that he felt physically threatened when Ms. Williams, who had already raised her voice, approached him, and in a regrettable moment of panic, he raised his hand. A few murmurs rose from the courtroom seats, but Judge Calloway quickly silenced them with a glance. Granger continued, "Let's be honest. We all have moments we wish we could take back. This trial is not about painting Brad Turner as perfect. It is about determining whether his actions on that day rise to the level of civil liability, whether they were malicious or calculated. I say they were not. I say they were human." He paused for dramatic effect, then walked slowly back to his table. The law does not punish emotional imperfection. It punishes intent, and we contend that intent, Hostile, targeted, racial intent did not exist in Mr. Turner's mind. What did exist was stress, miscommunication, and fear. Then he sat. For a moment, the room held its breath. Ava Hayes stood almost immediately after, rising slowly with a look of controlled resolve. But before she could speak, something unexpected happened. A hand rose in the middle of the gallery. A man, mid-40s, neatly dressed in a navy blazer, stood up. "I'm sorry, Your Honor," he said clearly, "but I need to speak." Judge Calloway leaned forward. "Sir, this is highly irregular. If you're not on the witness list, I understand," he replied, "but I was there, the day it happened. I saw everything." A hush fell over the courtroom. Granger's eyes narrowed. Aaron turned slightly, staring at the man with narrowed eyes, searching her memory. Judge Calloway motioned to the bailiff. "Approach the bench." After a quick, whispered exchange with the attorneys and the judge, it became clear the man had already submitted a witness affidavit days earlier, but had not been called by either side. He had slipped through the cracks of preparation. The judge weighed the moment, tapped her gavel once, and said, "Very well, I'll allow this. Sir, you may be seated. You'll be called shortly under oath." Granger's confident posture faltered for a moment. Ava looked over at Aaron, her eyebrows raised, barely perceptible. As the man sat again, the tension broke, but the room now buzzed with new energy. Who was he? What had he seen? And why had? Neither side expected him to speak. Back at the defense table, Brad leaned toward Granger. "Who is that?" Granger whispered something back, inaudible, but his tone was sharp, clipped, uneasy. Judge Calloway banged the gavel again. "Court is in recess for 15 minutes. When we return, the court will hear from Mr. Jason Ward, a witness to the events of the day in question." The courtroom emptied slowly, the buzz of conversation growing louder as people filtered out to the hallway. Social media exploded within minutes. Someone had posted the clip of the man standing, his statement echoing around Twitter and TikTok. "I saw everything." Back inside the courthouse's private consultation room, Ava turned to Aaron. "He might be the edge we didn't know we needed." Aaron nodded slowly. "Let's hope he tells the truth." Because while Brad's team was busy crafting the perfect image of a man who had simply snapped under pressure, someone in that courtroom had just raised their hand to shatter that illusion, and no one, not even Brad, saw it coming. The courtroom settled into a charged stillness as the bailiff called the next witness to the stand. All eyes turned as an older woman, likely in her late 60s, stepped forward with careful, deliberate steps. She wore a simple blue blouse and dark slacks, her white hair neatly pinned back. Her name was Clara Jennings. She held her purse close to her side as if it contained something heavier than it appeared. When she reached the witness chair, she sat down slowly, took the oath with a firm voice, and looked directly at Judge Calloway. Ava Hayes rose first. She walked toward Clara, not with dramatic flair, but with quiet intent. "Miss Jennings," Ava began, "can you please state your full name and occupation for the record?" "Clara Rose Jennings," she replied, voice steady. "Retired school counselor. Worked in the Ashton district for 32 years. "Thank you," Ava said. "And were you present on the day of the incident involving my client, Ms. Erin Williams and Officer Brad Turner?" "I was," Clara said, nodding. "I parked just a few spaces down from them. I didn't realize what I was seeing at first, but I saw him strike her, and I saw her defend herself." A murmur rose in the gallery, quickly silenced by the bailiff's firm look. Ava leaned in. "Miss Jennings, did you know the man involved was a police officer at the time?" Clara shook her head. "Not then, but I recognized his face immediately afterward. I'd seen him before." Ava's voice softened. "Would you tell the court where and when you last saw Officer Turner before this incident?" Clara inhaled deeply. "Last year, September. I had a neighbor. His name was Tom Bell. We lived in the same complex." He was elderly, in poor health, and he had a run-in with a man who parked in his assigned space. That man was Brad Turner. He was off duty, no uniform, but quick to mention he was a cop. He got aggressive when Tom asked him to move his vehicle. I watched the whole thing from my porch. Clara paused, her hands tightening slightly in her lap. Turner shoved Tom's cane aside and told him to watch who he talked to. Tom was shaken. I told him we should report it, and we did. "You filed a report?" Ava asked quickly. "Yes, at the precinct on 4th Street. They took it down, but no one ever followed up. No call, no visit, nothing." Later that week, Turner came by our building again, but not in his car. He was standing across the street, just watching. I told the apartment manager. He said there was nothing he could do. The courtroom went completely still. Even the creak of chairs had stopped. Ava stepped back slowly, letting the words hang in the air before turning to the judge. "Your Honor, we request that this testimony be entered into the official record, and that the court allow for this witness to submit the report she filed at the time, if it can be located." Judge Calloway nodded, her face stern. "So ordered." From the defense table, Ellis Granger stood with obvious hesitation. "Permission to cross, Your Honor?" "Granted," Calloway replied without looking up. Granger approached Clara with a polite but rehearsed smile. "Ms. Jennings, you're a respected community member. No one questions your dedication to the truth, but you'll agree, this previous encounter with Mr. Turner, if it even occurred, has no direct bearing on the events that happened between him and Ms. Williams." Clara tilted her head, her eyes sharp. "No bearing? Sir, I'm not a lawyer, but when someone threatens a frail old man, watches a woman's apartment after a complaint, and then slaps another woman in broad daylight a year later, I'd say that's a pattern." Granger blinked, caught off guard. "You understand that Officer Turner was never charged or reprimanded for the incident you described?" "I understand. That doesn't make it untrue," Clara replied evenly. "It means no one bothered to care." A hushed gasp rippled through the room. Granger's posture stiffened. "So, you're saying this is a systemic issue? That the department is at fault for not investigating?" "I'm saying," Clara said, leaning slightly forward, "that Brad Turner has worn the badge as a shield, and now he's using it as a sword." Judge Calloway raised a hand. "Enough. The jury will disregard the metaphorical phrasing." Granger stepped back, briefly flustered. No further questions. Clara was excused, but not before glancing toward Aaron with a soft nod. Aaron returned it, overwhelmed by a silent but powerful sense of recognition, of shared experience, of validation. Back at the defense table, Brad's jaw was clenched. For the first time in the entire trial, he shifted in his seat, not out of confidence or boredom, but discomfort. His carefully maintained facade, upstanding citizen, overwhelmed father, noble officer, had just taken a hit. The courtroom was still, processing the impact of Clara's words as Ava returned to the plaintiff's table and leaned toward Aaron. "She wasn't on our list," Ava whispered, "but she might have just cracked their entire case." Aaron didn't smile. She couldn't. Not yet, but she felt something shift, not just in the room, but in the trial itself. Brad sat stone still, refusing to meet anyone's gaze. He looked ahead at nothing, his fingers tapping slowly against the wood of the table. And for the first time, people began to wonder, not if Aaron had been telling the truth, but how many others like Clara had been ignored. The courtroom door creaked open as Clara exited. She didn't say anything to the reporters waiting outside. She didn't need to, because inside, the mask that Brad Turner had so carefully worn, the respectable officer, the misunderstood man, was beginning to crack. The courtroom lights dimmed as the technician rolled out a portable monitor and connected it to the court's audio-visual system. The jury sat still, leaning forward slightly in their seats, anticipation thick in the air. All morning, the courtroom had buzzed with murmurs about what was to come. Now, the prosecution was about to present the video. Surveillance footage from the supermarket's parking lot, synced and time-stamped, with audio enhancement provided by a forensic technician. Ava Hayes stood at the center of the room, her voice measured and clear. "Your Honor, with the court's permission, we will now play Exhibit C, security footage obtained from Ashton Supermarket, dated the afternoon of the incident involving my client, Ms. Erin Williams." Judge Calloway nodded, folding her hands. "Proceed." The screen lit up, showing a wide-angle view of the parking lot. The footage began with an overhead perspective. Cars weaving in and out, a cluster of shoppers moving in and out of frame. It zoomed into a corner where Erin's car turned slowly into a vacant space, carefully aligned between the white lines. The timestamp read 4:16 p.m. Moments later, a white SUV screeched to a halt nearby, abruptly and with visible aggression. The driver, Brad Turner, could be seen exiting his vehicle quickly, already tense. The camera captured him walking directly toward Erin's car. Though there was no sound on this first clip, his posture and movements were clearly confrontational. Then came the audio-enhanced footage from a closer angle, captured by a secondary camera closer to the store entrance. Brad's voice, laced with sarcasm and bitterness, was faint but audible. "You people never pay attention. Always taking what doesn't belong to you." A few jurors flinched. Someone in the gallery let out a quiet exhale. The footage continued. Erin responded with composure, her gestures calm. She was clearly trying to avoid conflict. But Brad stepped closer, his finger pointing aggressively, invading her space. Then, in plain view of the camera, he raised his hand and struck her across the face. Gasps filled the room. The video showed Erin momentarily stunned, but within a second she responded, not out of rage, but with a single instinctive slap. The audio barely caught her words. "You don't get to hit people, not even with a badge." The tension in the room deepened. Then came the final part of the clip. Erin turned and walked into the store. Brad remained outside, pacing. Moments later, he reached into his vehicle, pulled something from inside, possibly keys or a tool, and walked toward Erin's parked car. He crouched slightly and dragged an object along the side of her vehicle, leaving deep scratches. The movement was slow and deliberate. There was no mistaking what the jury had just seen. When the footage stopped, the silence was heavier than anything said all week. Even Granger, Brad's attorney, remained seated, motionless. Judge Calloway cleared her throat. "Members of the jury, the contents of this video are to be considered official evidence. You will recall that witness testimony has already identified the vehicle and parties involved." Ava stepped forward. "No further interpretation is required, Your Honor. The footage speaks for itself." The judge nodded. "Understood." The lights returned to full brightness, but the room still felt dimmed by the weight of what had just unfolded. Brad Turner sat rigidly, his face a mixture of shock and forced indifference. His jaw clenched tighter each time he sensed eyes settling on him. His supporters, few to begin with, now sat without speaking. The jury's expressions had shifted too. Some stared blankly, processing. Others looked down, unwilling to meet Brad's gaze. The sense of narrative control that Granger had tried to craft, of an overwhelmed man reacting poorly in a moment of stress, was unraveling. Ava returned to her seat, leaning in toward Erin. "This is your moment," she whispered. "They're calling you next." Across the courtroom, a clerk rose and approached the plaintiff's table. "Ms. Erin Williams," she said, voice formal but kind. "Please come forward to the witness stand." Erin stood. She adjusted her blazer, walked toward the front of the room, and climbed the steps to the witness chair with a steady pace. Her movements were precise, confident, but not performative. She faced the jury, then looked briefly toward Judge Calloway as she took her oath. Hands folded in her lap, Eyes focused, Aaron waited for the first question. And this time, unlike the chaos of that Saturday in the parking lot, or the panic of reporting a crime no one wanted to believe, she felt no fear. She had seen the truth played before a courtroom. She had watched a man reveal his true character without uttering a single word. And now, it was her turn to speak it plainly. The mask had cracked, the footage had confirmed the damage, and justice had taken its first undeniable step forward. All eyes were on Aaron now, and she was ready. Aaron sat tall in the witness chair, hands steady in her lap, eyes fixed ahead. The courtroom had returned to silence, the video evidence still echoing in everyone's minds. But now came the moment that no screen could deliver. The sound of her voice, her truth, her choice to stand in the middle of a legal storm and speak. Ava Hayes approached slowly, her steps careful, not rehearsed, but reverent. She stopped just a few feet from the witness box and nodded once. "Ms. Williams," Ava began, her voice firm, "can you please tell the court, in your own words, what happened that day?" Aaron exhaled once through her nose, then spoke, low at first, but clear. "It was a Saturday afternoon. I had just finished a 13-hour shift at the hospital. I'm a nurse. I work trauma nights, which means I see people at their worst. That day, I just wanted to buy some groceries and go home." She glanced toward the jury, then back to Ava. I pulled into a spot. It was open, clearly. I didn't cut anyone off. No one was waiting, at least from what I could see. But the second I parked, I heard tires screech behind me. Her voice grew steadier. This man, Brad Turner, pulled up close behind me. He rolled down his window, yelled at me that I had taken his spot. I tried to stay calm. I told him I didn't see him. I was polite. I was honest. Aaron paused briefly, but then he got out of his car, walked up to mine, stood between me and the door, and then he said things that made it clear this wasn't just about a parking space. "What did he say?" Ava asked gently. Aaron looked the jury in the eye. "He said, 'You people never pay attention.' He said I had no respect. He called me arrogant. He told me I didn't belong there. He made it clear. He didn't just see me as someone who parked wrong. He saw me as less." Some jurors shifted. Others held still, their faces solemn. I told him I didn't want trouble, that it wasn't worth arguing, but he kept escalating. He got closer. He jabbed his finger toward me. I turned to walk away, to go into the store. Erin paused again, her breath caught, and that's when he slapped me. The words came sharp, like metal breaking. I wasn't yelling. I wasn't threatening. I wasn't even looking at him when he did it. I just felt it, the slap across my cheek, and for a second, everything froze. Not just from the shock, but because I knew what he thought, that he could get away with it. Her hands clenched slightly. I hit him back, not out of rage, out of something deeper. I hit him because I'm a human being, because I have dignity, and because nobody has the right to treat another person like that, not even someone with a badge. Ava let a beat of silence pass before asking, "Did you know he was a police officer at the time?" Erin shook her head. He wasn't in uniform, no badge, just hate." Ava stepped back. "Did you damage his vehicle? Did you make any threats? Did you strike first?" "No," Erin said calmly. "All I did was stand my ground." "And what did you feel after the incident?" Erin's voice grew quieter. "Alone. At first, embarrassed, angry, hurt, not just physically but emotionally, because I had done everything right, and it didn't matter." She paused again, her tone shifting. But then something else came. Resolve. I decided I wouldn't just go home and cry this time. I reported it. I told the truth, and I chose to fight. Ava nodded solemnly. "Thank you, Ms. Williams." She returned to her seat, and the courtroom held its breath again. Judge Calloway looked to the defense table. Defense may cross-examine. Ellis Granger stood, his face composed, but his shoulders tight. He walked to the center, folded his hands in front of him, and began. "Ms. Williams, Thank you for your testimony. I want to ask you a few clarifying questions, if I may." Aaron nodded once. "You said Mr. Turner approached you with anger, that he was aggressive, but you also said you didn't see him waiting for the space. Is it possible, just possible, that your failure to see him caused his frustration?" Aaron didn't hesitate. "It's possible I didn't see him, but frustration doesn't justify violence." Granger nodded, pacing slightly. "Fair, but would you agree that emotions were running high for both of you?" I stayed calm. He didn't. Granger adjusted his stance. "When you slapped Mr. Turner, did you consider that he might interpret that as aggression? That perhaps he believed he was in danger?" "I didn't slap him until after he hit me," Aaron replied, unwavering. "If someone hits you and you respond, that's not aggression. That's human." Granger tried again. "But you didn't walk away." "I did try," she interrupted. "He blocked me." Granger paused. "So you're saying he gave you no choice?" "I'm saying I stood up for myself when no one else did." The courtroom held still again. Granger opened his mouth, closed it, then looked at Judge Calloway. No further questions. Judge Calloway nodded. "Ms. Williams, you may step down." Aaron stood, walked down from the witness chair, and returned to her seat beside Ava. Her hands didn't tremble. Her eyes didn't lower. She had told her story, not as a victim, but as someone who refused to be erased. As she sat, Granger returned to his client. Brad whispered something sharply under his breath, his expression tightening, because the defense had just tried to shift the blame, and now they were preparing their final move. As the final phase of arguments began, the air inside the courtroom was electric. Every spectator sat in tense silence. Reporters at the back of the room scribbled notes, phones silenced, waiting to capture the closing moments. On the prosecution's bench, Ava Hayes adjusted her notes, scanned her timeline, then rose slowly. Her posture was upright, her eyes steady, her voice ready to cut through the fog of deflection and distortion the defense had tried to cast. She stepped to the center of the room, faced the jury, and began. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you've heard a lot over the last several days. You've heard about frustration, about stress, about impulse. You've been asked to imagine what it's like to be Officer Brad Turner on a bad day. But I'm here to remind you of what this case is truly about. Not frustration, not stress, but power, abuse of it, and the line between law enforcement and personal prejudice." She paced slightly, drawing the jury in without theatrics. "Let's strip this down to facts. Not feelings, not excuses, just facts." She raised one finger. "Fact 1. Ms. Erin Williams parked in an open space. We all saw the footage. She did nothing illegal or disrespectful. She exited her vehicle calmly." Another finger. "Fact 2. Mr. Turner approached her, not the other way around. He initiated the confrontation. His words were aggressive and racially charged. You people. That's not frustration. That's prejudice, plain and simple." She paused for emphasis. "And then comes the most damning moment. Fact 3. He struck her. Unprovoked. On camera. You've seen it with your own eyes. And after that, after Aaron, in the heat of a humiliating moment, responded with a single defensive strike, he didn't walk away. He vandalized her car. Deliberately. Maliciously. Her voice never rose above conversational, but the weight behind each sentence pressed like steel. The defense wants you to believe that Mr. Turner is a man under pressure, that his job is hard, that maybe, just maybe, you should empathize with him. But let me ask you this. If Erin Williams had been the one to initiate the slap, without provocation, what would this courtroom look like today?" A few jurors glanced at each other. The defense wants you to believe she's exaggerating, that her reaction was unnecessary, that maybe, just maybe, she invited this. I ask you to listen not to what they're implying, but to what they're afraid to say aloud, that her pain, her humiliation, and her humanity don't matter as much because of who she is. She turned slightly toward Brad's table. They want you to believe that because he wears a badge, his word should carry more weight. But let's remember that Brad Turner wasn't acting as a police officer that day. He was off duty. No uniform, no authority. What he had, however, was entitlement, and the belief that his authority still followed him wherever he went, that he could strike a woman and walk away with his pride intact. Ava paused again. We're not here to debate his profession. We're here to determine whether he committed assault and property damage, and whether those acts were fueled by prejudice. And the answer is yes. Resoundingly, yes. She stepped back briefly, then continued, her voice a bit softer but edged with resolve. Let's not forget Clara Jennings, a citizen with no stake in this case. She came forward not for recognition, but because her conscience wouldn't let her stay silent. She told you about another time Brad Turner used intimidation and power to silence someone weaker than him. Her testimony revealed that this wasn't a one-time outburst. It's a pattern. She walked toward the screen that had shown the video earlier and gestured toward it, though it was now blank. That video didn't just show a slap, it showed character. Brad Turner looked around to see if anyone was watching. He vandalized Erin's car when she wasn't looking. That is not the action of a man under pressure. That is the action of someone who believed he would never be held accountable. Ava turned back toward the jury and let the silence stretch for just a breath. You don't need to feel sorry for him. You don't need to second-guess your instincts. What you saw is real. What Erin endured is real. And justice, true justice, requires that we hold people accountable not based on their job titles, but on their actions. She took a final step forward. Erin Williams stood up not just for herself, but for every person who has been told they don't belong, for every voice dismissed, for every quiet moment of injustice that never made it to a courtroom. This case is your chance to say that dignity matters, that truth matters, that the law does not bend for those who abuse it. She nodded once, quietly. We trust you to see that. Then she returned to her seat. Judge Calloway gave brief instructions to the jury, reminding them to deliberate only on the evidence presented, to disregard personal biases, and to focus solely on the law as applied to the facts. With that, the bailiff gestured, and the 12 jurors stood and filed quietly into the deliberation chamber. Erin sat frozen in her chair, her fingers interlocked tightly, her shoulders rigid, her breathing shallow. Ava leaned toward her, whispering something calm and measured, but Erin barely registered the words, because now there was nothing left to do. The jury was behind closed doors, and all Erin could do was wait. The heavy oak doors to the jury room creaked open just before 4 p.m. The murmur in the courtroom stopped instantly. Judge Calloway looked up from her bench and nodded to the bailiff, who stepped forward and addressed the room. All rise. Everyone stood, the tension sharp and silent as the 12 jurors filed back into their seats. None of them looked directly at Brad. A few glanced at Erin. Most kept their eyes fixed forward, stoic and unreadable. Erin stood beside Ava, heart pounding. Her mouth was dry, palms damp, her body still and frozen, but her thoughts spinning. She wasn't sure what to feel, hope, dread, or exhaustion. She had played every possible outcome in her mind, over and over again, but nothing prepared her for this moment. The judge nodded. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, have you reached a verdict? The foreperson, a woman in her late 50s with short gray hair and reading glasses perched at the tip of her nose, stood. We have, Your Honor. The bailiff took a sealed envelope from her and handed it to Judge Calloway. The judge opened it, read silently, then passed the paper back to the clerk. Her voice was measured and firm. Will the defendant please rise? Brad stood slowly, his jaw clenched, his posture stiff. His eyes, once so cold and smug, now darted toward the jury bench, as if trying to read their minds one last time. The clerk stood and began to read. In the matter of the state of California versus Brad Turner, on the count of misdemeanor assault with aggravating circumstances, we the jury find the defendant guilty. A pause. On the count of criminal vandalism with malicious intent, we the jury find the defendant guilty. A collective breath released across the room, as if the entire gallery had been holding it for hours. In consideration of the defendant's status as an off-duty law enforcement officer and the racial motivation evident in the act of violence, the clerk continued, we further recommend enhanced sentencing to reflect bias-motivated conduct under California Penal Code Section 422.55. Judge Calloway's eyes moved slowly across the courtroom, then landed on Brad. Mr. Turner, based on the jury's findings, this court will remand you into custody pending sentencing. Your prior service will be considered at sentencing, but it does not absolve the severity of your conduct. Bail is denied. The bailiff moved behind Brad, securing handcuffs around his wrists with practiced speed. The click of metal echoed loudly, far more symbolic now than during his arrest. Brad's face contorted, not in fear, but disbelief. For the first time in the trial, he looked shaken. He turned toward Aaron. His lips parted, like he might say something, plead, insult, justify, but the words never came. Ava stepped slightly in front of Aaron, blocking the line of sight, her stance subtle but firm. The officers escorted Brad from the courtroom. His footsteps were slow, his stare empty. His world narrowed to the corridor ahead. The door closed behind him with a dull thud. Judge Calloway addressed the court. Sentencing will take place in 2 weeks. Counsel for both parties will be notified. Court is adjourned. Her gavel struck once. People began to stand, stretch, whisper. The courtroom came back to life, but Erin stayed frozen. She sat slowly, as if every joint in her body had turned to stone. Her eyes remained fixed on the door where Brad had just exited. Around her, there was movement. Reporters making calls, court staff gathering files, family members of other spectators filing out. But she didn't move. A hand rested gently on her shoulder. "Avenue, you did it," she said quietly. Erin nodded once, barely, but inside she didn't feel victory. She had spoken her truth. She had endured the scrutiny, the pressure, the legal machinery grinding forward at a pace she couldn't control. And now the man who humiliated her was found guilty, publicly, officially. The system had worked this time, but instead of relief, there was a strange emptiness, because no verdict could take away what had been done. No conviction could erase the moment she stood frozen in a parking lot, with a red-hot handprint on her cheek and a crowd staring without stepping in. Justice had arrived, but it came late, and it came only after she had suffered every stage of being disbelieved, second-guessed, and examined under a microscope. Ava sat beside her, quietly respectful of the silence Erin needed. After a few minutes, Erin finally whispered, "It's over." Ava looked at her. "Number. It's just beginning." Erin nodded slowly. The trial might have ended, but the consequences wouldn't. The headlines, the interviews, the questions, the pain, the weight of being a symbol when all she ever wanted was to live her life in peace. And yet, somehow, knowing Brad would face the law wasn't enough to bring closure. She didn't feel triumphant. She didn't feel stronger. She just felt hollow. But beneath that hollowness, a quiet clarity was forming, because even if the system didn't heal what had been broken, it had listened, and that mattered. She stood, finally, gathered her things, walked slowly through the aisle between the wooden pews and out through the tall doors into the light. Cameras were waiting. So were strangers with signs. But Erin didn't stop. She just walked, not because it was over, but because it had to continue. The apartment was still, its usual hum of life replaced by a weighty silence. Erin sat on the edge of her couch, arms wrapped around herself, staring into the dim glow of the lamp in the corner. The verdict had been read hours ago, but the echo of that moment hadn't brought the closure she imagined. She had expected some sort of internal shift, something like triumph or even peace, but instead there was only a hollow ache that pressed into her chest like an anchor. Outside, the city was alive. Distant sirens cut through the night like thin blades. Cars drifted past below her balcony, headlights bouncing off wet pavement. It had rained earlier, just enough to darken the world without cleansing it. Her television was off. Her phone sat face down on the coffee table, untouched since she left the courthouse. Ava had offered to stop by, even just for tea, but Erin had politely declined. She needed time, space, silence. She needed to understand why she felt like nothing had changed. She leaned forward, resting her elbows on her knees, hands clasped. The room was warm, but a chill crept up her spine anyway. In the shadows, she saw herself, not the woman in court, poised and unwavering, but the woman in the parking lot. The sting on her cheek had long since faded, but the memory still burned. Not just the slap, but everything that came with it. The humiliation, the fear, the knowledge that a man with power had chosen to use it to belittle her, that her dignity had been treated as disposable. She tried to replay the day's events from a distance, as if watching someone else's story. The way the jury had looked at her during her testimony, the murmurs when the video played, the collective exhale when the verdict was announced. Even now, she could hear the gavel in her mind, that final, decisive strike. It should have meant something more. She stood, walked to the kitchen, poured herself a glass of water. Her hand trembled slightly, and she paused, gripping the edge of the counter for balance. Her reflection stared back at her from the microwave's glass door. Tired, drawn, but not broken. Why did it still feel like she had lost? Because winning a trial didn't erase the fear of not being believed. Because accountability didn't erase the public doubt, the online comments, the messages calling her a liar or worse. Because justice, while served, didn't come without scars. She returned to the couch, glass in hand, and finally flipped over her phone. Dozens of missed calls, messages, Ava, her sister, a few friends, even a journalist from a local paper. She ignored them all until one notification caught her eye. Unknown number. Just a simple message. You don't know me, but I saw the trial. I saw the clip. I saw you. Thank you for not staying silent. Erin stared at the words, reread them, again and again. Then another message from the same number followed. My daughter is 10. She's black. She asked me why the man hit you. I told her sometimes people hate what they don't understand. But then she said, Erin didn't cry. She stood up. That's what she'll remember. That's what I'll remember. Her chest tightened, not with grief, but something warmer, deeper, unfamiliar. For the first time all day, her eyes welled up, not from sadness, from release. It wasn't the verdict that mattered. It was what came after, the ripples. She hadn't stood up just for herself. She had stood for that child, for the mother who took the time to reach out, for people who had felt the sting of dismissal but hadn't found the words yet to fight back. Maybe she hadn't realized it at the time, but she had become something more than a plaintiff in a court case. She had become proof that standing your ground mattered, even when the world tried to shove you back down. Erin replied simply, "Thank you. That means more than I can say." She set the phone down again, this time screen up, and for the first time in hours she exhaled without feeling like something inside her was breaking. Outside, the city continued on. The lights shimmered through leftover raindrops on the window pane. A dog barked in the distance. Life had moved forward even as she stood still, but now something in her had shifted. She rose again, walked toward the balcony, slid the glass door open, and stepped into the cool night air. The wind met her face like a whisper, gentle and steady. Somewhere below, someone laughed, brief, bright, real. She leaned on the railing and closed her eyes. The storm hadn't broken her. It had revealed her. And, as the next gust of wind pushed past, Aaron understood that sometimes the heaviest victories are the ones that come with silence, the ones that don't feel like a win until someone else sees the courage it took to survive. She opened her eyes. The world looked the same, but she didn't. The sun filtered softly through the blinds in Erin's apartment as she sat at her kitchen table, sipping her morning tea. Her inbox was full again, but she no longer dreaded opening it. Each message was a reminder that something had changed, not just in the courts or on the news, but in people's lives. Among the usual emails from journalists and advocacy groups, one subject line stood out: "You gave me courage." Erin opened it. It was from a college student named Layla. She introduced herself as a 21-year-old sociology major who had been following Erin's case since the day the video first went viral. The message was long but heartfelt. Layla recounted an incident that happened to her. An officer had searched her without cause after a campus event. She had wanted to speak up, to file a report, but fear and self-doubt kept her silent, until she watched Erin testify, until she heard her say, "I fought back because I am human." "When you said that," Layla wrote, "something in me unlocked. I filed my complaint the next day. I wasn't sure if anything would come of it, but I had to do it. And now, there's an investigation. Thank you for showing me I could stand up too." Erin read the message twice. Her chest swelled, not with pride, but with something steadier: purpose. The pain she had carried no longer sat inside her like a weight. Now, it moved, reaching places she'd never imagined. Her story wasn't just hers anymore. It was a bridge. She leaned back and stared at the ceiling. If her experience could help someone else speak, maybe she needed to keep going. Not as a victim, not even just as a survivor, but as a witness, a messenger. That day in the parking lot had taken something from her, but it had also given her something else, a voice, and she finally knew what to do with it. 2 weeks later, Erin stood behind a podium in the community hall downtown, facing a packed room of residents, students, and activists. The event was titled "Dignity and Defiance: The Right to Be Seen." Banners lined the walls. Camera crews hovered in the back. Ava Hayes sat in the front row, smiling with quiet encouragement. Erin gripped the microphone. Her heart beat fast, but her hands didn't shake. "I didn't ask for what happened to me," she began, "but I am responsible for what I do with it now." She spoke not just of the slap or the courtroom, but of the silence after, the aftermath that no one sees, the exhaustion, the doubt, the slow process of healing. "For a long time I thought standing up meant shouting louder. Now I know, sometimes standing up just means refusing to disappear." Her words rippled across the room. People nodded. Some wiped their eyes. And then came the moment that caught even Erin off guard. After her speech, a representative from the state's Civil Rights Oversight Board approached her. The woman introduced herself as Diane Ford and spoke in a low, serious tone. "We've been following your case. The board's beginning a review of how police misconduct is investigated at the state level. We need community voices at the table, especially ones that speak not just from theory, but from lived truth. Would you consider joining us?" Erin hesitated only a moment before nodding. "Yes, I will." Weeks later, Erin sat in a high-ceilinged conference room at the state capitol. Around her were lawyers, policy advisors, community leaders. At first, she felt out of place. Just a nurse, just a citizen. But as the conversation turned to systemic reform, it became clear her perspective mattered. Not as a politician, as a person who had lived the flaws of the system. and refused to let it define her. Aaron proposed a simple idea: a community oversight panel with the power to review complaints, not just file them, transparency reports, a framework for evaluating bias and officer behavior. It wasn't revolutionary, but it was real, measurable. The room listened. Not all agreed, but all respected her presence, because she spoke with both clarity and scars. As the meeting ended, Diane Ford turned to her and said, "You know, this entire initiative was pushed forward because someone reminded us what happens when justice fails quietly. That someone was you." Erin walked out of the building with her heels clicking softly against the marble floor, the weight in her chest finally beginning to lift. A month later, she returned to the place where everything had started, the supermarket parking lot. It looked the same painted lines, the same rusted cart return, the same humming neon sign above the entrance. But to Erin, it felt different, like walking into a memory with new eyes. She stepped out of her car and stood quietly, hands in the pockets of her coat. The spot where she had once been struck still sat beneath the dull glow of a flickering lamppost. But it didn't hold power over her anymore. Now, it was simply a location, a landmark in her journey. She took one step forward and whispered, barely loud enough for anyone to hear, "I fell here, but this is where I stood up." There were no cameras this time, no reporters, just Erin, and that was enough. She stayed for a moment longer, letting the wind brush her face. Then she turned and walked back to her car. The journey had come full circle, but not to close, because for every Erin there were dozens more. And as long as there was one voice rising after silence, one person choosing to resist rather than retreat, then the road to justice was still alive. Erin Williams was never looking for a spotlight. She wasn't chasing attention, activism, or recognition. She simply wanted to finish her grocery run after a long shift at the hospital. But on that ordinary afternoon, everything changed when an off-duty white police officer struck her without cause, right there in a supermarket parking lot. What happened next wasn't planned. It wasn't dramatic in a Hollywood sense. It was human. Erin stood her ground, slapped him back, and in doing so sparked a wildfire of attention that no one, least of all her, could have anticipated. The incident could have ended there. But what Erin faced afterward was something far deeper, a system designed to doubt her, discredit her, and discard her voice. She was painted as the aggressor, the problem, the one who should have known better. But Erin refused to back down. Instead, she walked into the system that tried to silence her and forced it to listen. She filed reports. She testified. She stood in courtrooms packed with people who doubted her. And slowly, inch by inch, the truth came forward. Footage, witnesses, patterns of behavior that revealed a deeper truth. This wasn't just about one slap. It was about a culture of silence, power, and entitlement. But Erin's story didn't end with a guilty verdict. The courtroom victory was just one part of her journey. The real transformation came afterward, when she realized she could use her voice to protect others, when she stepped onto stages and into policy rooms to help rewrite how misconduct is investigated, when she answered emails from strangers who said, "Because of you, I spoke up." Her pain became fuel. Her voice became a tool, and her experience became a roadmap for others navigating the same fight. As Erin stood once again in that same parking lot, years later, she didn't see the place where she was attacked. She saw the place where everything began, where she first realized the cost of silence and the power of resistance. Now, we ask you, what would you do if no one else stood up? Would you speak out or stay silent? Tell us in the comments. We want to hear your truth. And if Erin's journey moved you, if it gave you strength, clarity, or even just a moment of reflection, don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to our channel. Because stories like Aaron's are not just powerful, they're necessary, and they remind us that justice doesn't begin in court. It begins when someone chooses to say, "Enough,"